Hello everyone. I recently saw X-Men Apocalypse, and without giving a full review here, I thought it was really good. I'm probably one of the few people that actually likes the X-Men movies more than the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Actually, I'm probably the only one. Before you hit the dislike button, let me explain. The X-Men series has its problems, and in my eyes only has two bad movies in the whole series. X-Men The Last Stand and X-Men Origins Wolverine are bad movies, especially Origins. The MCU, though, only has one bad movie, and that's Iron Man 2. But for me, I grew up with X-Men and X2. Years later, I saw X-Men First Class and The Wolverine and loved both of those movies. So much so that I saw X-Men Days of Future Past, Deadpool, and X-Men Apocalypse all in theaters. Now, I only go to see a movie in theaters if I really want to, as obviously I love this series if I saw the last three installments in theaters. And yes, Deadpool is part of the series. Anyways, in this video, I'm going to try my best to explain the current timeline in the X-Men movies, which is a very complicated and confusing thing for casual fans of the series. X-Men Days of Future Past was a phenomenal movie, but it completely changed the timeline of the series and even deleted some of the films entirely. I'm going to go through each of the films and explain what parts still exist in the timeline and which parts do not. And yes, I will include every single movie and explain how they can still fit in. Obviously, there will be spoilers for every single movie, including Deadpool and X-Men Apocalypse, which are new. So if you haven't seen all of the movies, please leave now. Alright, so starting off, I need to explain that X-Men Days of Future Past altered anything that takes place after 1973. So that means only one part of the first X-Men film still exists in the timeline, and that's the scene in 1944 that shows Eric Lenchner, aka Magneto, using his powers at the concentration camp. Aside from this scene, the rest of the first X-Men film is removed from the timeline. Now with X2 and X-Men The Last Stand, both of these movies are removed entirely. Neither of the movies has any scene that takes place before 1973, so they are both eliminated. Thank God, because trying to fit in that flashback scene with poorly CGI'd Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen would have been a pain, considering Professor X is walking, even though X-Men First Class later showed he lost his legs in 1962. Well, at least the use of his legs, I mean. So yeah, no X2 and no X-Men The Last Stand in the new timeline. Alright, next is X-Men Origins Wolverine. The opening scene that takes place in 1845 with Wolverine killing his own father still exists. Also, the montage of Wolverine and Sabretooth fighting in the Civil War, World War I, and World War II still exist. However, the part that shows them in the Vietnam War is no longer part of the new timeline because it can be assumed that when 2023 Wolverine wakes up in 1973 Wolverine and Days of Future Past, it prevents the 1970s Wolverine from fighting in Vietnam. Also, this prevents him from meeting Danny Houston, Stryker, in Vietnam, joining Team X, meeting Kayla Silverfox, and getting the Animanium, the way he did in Origins. X-Men Apocalypse shows that Wolverine still ends up getting the Animantium anyways as part of the new timeline, this time looking more like Weapon X. Anyways, I'm glad these parts are removed from Origins because how can you have Danny Houston Stryker and Josh Hellman Stryker exist in the same time period? Also, the mutant Wade Wilson in this movie can't exist because of the alternate and, might I add, much better Wade Wilson we get in the Deadpool movie. So in short, the 1845 scene and the war montage scene, excluding Vietnam, are the only parts of X-Men Origins Wolverine that still exist in the new timeline. Next is X-Men First Class. The entire film takes place before 1973, so the events of the whole film remain intact. Next is the Wolverine. The only part of the movie that exists in the new timeline is the first scene of the movie in 1945 that shows Wolverine saving the life of Yoshida from the atomic bomb in Nagasaki. The rest of the movie is deleted from the timeline because it takes place after 1973. Next is X-Men Days of Future Past. Every scene from Dystopian 2023 is deleted because Mystique doesn't kill Trask, preventing the authorization of the Sentinels and the dark future they would bring. All the 1973 scenes remain in the new timeline, as well as the ending scene that shows Wolverine discovering the new 2023, with Jean Grey and Cyclops still alive. The after-credits scene with Young Apocalypse also exists, and is the earliest part of the entire timeline. Now on to Deadpool. We can assume that because Deadpool came out after Days of Future Past, that this is a different version of Wade Wilson that exists in modern day and is not the mutant Wade Wilson from Team X and Origins. The entire movie's events remain intact because it already takes place in the new timeline. And finally, X-Men Apocalypse also goes unchanged because it takes place 10 years after the altered 1973 and is part of the new timeline. So to go through everything in order, First, we have the post-credit scene in Days of Future Past that shows the young Apocalypse building the pyramids. That is the earliest point of the entire timeline. Next, we have the opening of X-Men Apocalypse, which takes place in 3500 BC, that explains how Apocalypse was put to rest for thousands of years. Next, we have the opening of X-Men Origins Wolverine, that shows Wolverine killing his father in 1845. After that is the montage of Sabretooth and Wolverine fighting in the Civil War, World War I, and World War II. Next, we have the scene from the first X-Men film in 1944 that shows Magneto in the concentration camp screaming out to his parents. Immediately after that scene is the scene in X-Men First Class in which Sebastian Shaw shoots Magneto's mother because Magneto couldn't move the coin. That is followed by the scene in First Class where Charles Xavier first meets Mystique. After that is the 1945 scene in The Wolverine, in which Wolverine saves Yoshida's life from the atomic bomb. After that we go to 1962 and the events of X-Men First Class. 11 years after that, it's 1973, and all of the 1973 scenes from X-Men Days of Future Past play out. 10 years later, it's 1983, and the entirety of X-Men Apocalypse plays out. Years later, the events of Deadpool take place in what I can assume is present-day 2016 due to all the references of modern-day things, such as Adventure Time, Jared from Subway, Mama June, and emojis. Finally, the last part of this new timeline is the ending of Days of Future Past that shows a much brighter 2023. Well, I hope that covered everything, and now you understand the timeline. The next movie in the series is going to be a third Wolverine film, and it's going to be Hugh Jackman's last time playing Wolverine. I look forward to the movie, and hopefully it fits into this new timeline and doesn't screw anything up. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe and leave a like. Have an awesome day.